So we recently did a list of the top 15 worst adapted DCEU superheroes and saw some of the ways this attempt at a shared universe kind of shot itself in the foot by making major changes to the source material that hurt the potential popularity of these movies and characters for a lot of people. Now it's time to take a look at how the villains were adapted from the comics into the movies to compare and see whether they contributed to this universe falling apart or if changing them actually benefited some of these movies. To do that, I've used the time-honored 3C system to rate every single DC Comics villain adapted into the DCEU by how well or poorly they were adapted into those movies and compiled a list of the 15 worst adapted of all of them. For those of you not in the know, those 3 C's are costume, character, and continuity. Costume rates a character's outfit or costume, their overall look, and their superficial physical characteristics. Character rates their personality, their relationships with others, and their powers or abilities. And continuity rates their origins, their iconic moments, and their overall place in the world, universe, or timeline. Now, whatever you're expecting this list to look like, you're likely totally wrong. The DCEU was really weird, with all kinds of random choices being made by random people behind the scenes, creating quite a convoluted mess of different choices of what and how to adapt different characters. And as I always say before I start, let me remind you all that a villain's placement on this list is not a commentary about whether this version of the character is good or bad. It's only a ranking of how well or poorly they were adapted in relation to other DCEU villains. Trust me, there are villains towards the bottom of this list that I really liked in their movies, and there are ones who are well above this list that I would place on the absolute bottom of a most hated DCEU villains list, were I making that instead. So let's take a look at the 15 most poorly adapted DCEU villains and see if we learn anything. So at the 15th worst adapted DCEU villain, we start with Black Mask. In both the comics and the DCEU, Roman Sionis is a crime lord in Gotham City. Both versions grew up wealthy, worked at their father's companies, and have a hatred for their parents. In the comics, it's because of their hypocritical and controlling nature through his entire life. In the movies, though, it's because they cut him off from the family fortune due to his reckless, childish spending habits. Both versions became violent and sadistic criminals who wear a black mask and call his crime network the False Face Society. In the comics, his obsession with masks comes from the masks his family wore in public to hide their contempt for others and their own personal family issues, as well as always feeling like he had to hide his true nature behind a mask of civility and normalcy as well. The comic version is virtually always wearing his black mask, considering it his new identity after killing off his past life as Roman Sionis, with some versions even having the mask fused to his face. While in the movie, we don't learn why he's obsessed with masks, seemingly just because he thinks they're cool. He travels the world collecting various oddities, one of which is a black mask, which he only wears at the end of the movie, conducting most of his criminal activity with just his normal face. The comic version is a dangerous and powerful criminal who's fought against Batman many times and stands at the level of other Gotham crime lords like the Penguin. In the movie, his personality is completely different, being a lot more charismatic, but also more whiny and entitled. His criminal organization seems to be quite a bit smaller, and I doubt he could deal with Batman since he gets obliterated by Harley Quinn and that crappy version of the Birds of Prey. Honestly, I don't understand how he could have operated in Gotham for this long if the DCEU Batman is such a violent psychopath. Well, as different as that was, it's still more or less an adaptation of the character from the comics, and I hope you enjoyed that, because from this point on, that's all about to change. Now down to 14 with Polka Dot Man. The comic and movie versions both wear similar costumes, are villains, and are connected to polka dots. Otherwise, they share virtually nothing in common. In the comics, Polka Dot Man was originally known as Mr. Polka Dot, and wore a costume covered in detachable polka dots that were actually a variety of gadgets, including a buzzsaw, a flying disc he could ride on, polka dots that could transform into huge fists, and many other equally bizarre things. He went on a crime spree that specifically targeted locales related to dots and spots before being defeated by Batman and Robin. Since then, he's been seen as a bit of a joke in the Gotham underworld, never really reaching the heights of other costume Batman foes. In the DCEU, his polka dots do not come from his costume, but actually come out of his body. When he was younger, his scientist mother exposed him to an interdimensional virus to try to give him powers to become a superhero. It's causing polka dots to form inside of him and slowly eat him alive. The only way to stop this is by expelling them from his body every day, and with the help of specially designed gauntlets, he can direct them at others, incinerating anything they come into contact with. Due to the trauma of the experiments and having killed his own mother, he is mentally unwell, and often hallucinates those around him as having her face. Despite his mother's wishes for him, he becomes a costume criminal and was eventually arrested and forced into Task Force X. So, Very different, but I cannot imagine there were a lot of fans out there overly pissed off. Since as infamous as Polka Dot Man is, he hasn't had a huge amount of development over the years. However, I have to ask, the whole point of even using Polka Dot Man in this movie is how ridiculous it is that there's even a character with that name in comics. But if you completely change him into a totally different character, did you even adapt that character from the comics in the first place? Should you deserve any of the recognition for lifting him from obscurity and even putting him in a movie like this? Or could you have just made up an entirely new goofy villain and it would have had the same effect? Anyway, doesn't matter, because now we're at 13 with Alberto Falcone. Alberto Falcone, in both the comics and movies, is the youngest son of Gotham crime lord Carmine Falcone. He wants to follow in his father's footsteps, but his father disagrees and pushes him away from the family business, causing a deep resentment within him. In the comic version, when the serial killer known as Holiday begins murdering people associated with the Maroni and Falcone families on holidays throughout the year, Alberto is taken in as a suspect and admits to all of the killings. Though, how many were actually him and not just ones he was taking credit for despite his father and build his criminal reputation is never fully revealed. In the DCEU, this petty, twerpy little guy who shoots people in the dark is, for some reason, turned into a brazen and ambitious supercriminal who breaks into Gotham General Hospital to steal a deadly virus, then causes a massive sinkhole to form that threatens the entire structure of the building so he can make his getaway, forcing Batman to call the Flash in to help so Batman can pursue Falcone and his men. They flee the scene in a heavily armored vehicle as Batman tries to catch up in a car crash, assault rifle, and explosion-filled chase that leaves many people dead and pushes Batman to his limits, ending with Batman and Alberto hanging over Gotham Harbor as the virus slowly falls from his hands towards the water, endangering the lives of all of Gotham. Luckily, at the last second, Wonder Woman flies in to stop the virus, saving the day. I have no idea why they did this. The whole point of the Falcone crime family is that they're the old, grounded style of criminals before the costume crazy started taking over. And they took a relatively small member of that family from one of the best-known Batman arcs of all time and turned him into a Joker-level threat that it takes the combined might of 3 Justice League members to stop. Literally any other Batman villain would have made more sense and been a lot more visually interesting, but nah, we'll just go with some guy. Now down to 12 with Doomsday. Doomsday was originally a mysterious monster who burst from a ship buried deep beneath the Earth's crust and went on a rampage, destroying and killing everything he came across. The Justice League arrives to stop him, but they are pretty much immediately curb-stomped. When Superman finally arrives, things escalate very, very quickly, and before he knows it, he's in a life-or-death battle for the fate of the world against a monster stronger than anything he's ever faced that cannot be reasoned with or talked down. Superman is forced to give everything he has, including his own life, to kill the monster and save Metropolis and the entire world from its apocalyptic rampage. Later, Doomsday's origins were revealed as being the product of an experiment to create the ultimate life form. A scientist released an infant into an inhospitable environment, and when it immediately died, he recovered the strongest of its surviving cells and cloned a slightly stronger version, releasing that one into the same environment. He repeated this process for decades until eventually the infant became strong enough to survive and developed the ability to regenerate and forcibly evolve from whatever had killed it on its own, going on to kill most of the life on the planet as well as the scientist himself. Escaping the planet, the creature rampaged across many planets until it was eventually captured and launched into space, eventually making its way to Earth. Now, parts of this could still be the case in the DCEU, but we don't know. Using a Kryptonian ship, Lex Luthor learns of ancient experiments done by Kryptonians that created a being known only as the Desecration Without Name, that is said to have been so hateful to sight and memory that the Council of Krypton decreed that none will ever again give life to it. Lex decides to make one of his own, using Zod's dead body and his own blood in order to ensure Superman will be killed if his plan to make Batman kill him fails. When Superman arrives, the creature bursts out of its birthing pod and they fight, culminating in both eventually killing each other. However, instead of bludgeoning each other to death, they stab each other through the hearts. Superman is stabbed with one of Doomsday's spikes, while Superman stabs Doomsday with a Kryptonian spear that kills him, since this Doomsday is basically just a souped-up Kryptonian. The movie version absorbs and discharges all energy as bursts of lightning and is able to shoot lasers from its eyes due to its Kryptonian origins. Besides being big and gray, it looks nothing like Doomsday. Sure, it grows bony protrusions, similar to how the comic version does as it fights, but in the movie, he never grows them in any of the iconic places that make him recognizable as the character he's supposed to be, specifically on his face. And on that note, I have to ask, is this thing even Doomsday? Or was the real Doomsday the creature created long ago, and this is just some weird jury-rigged copy Lex made? And while we're here, let me just go on another quick little tangent. I don't care how much Superman may want to, he cannot fly around while holding goddamn kryptonite. This is the same thing that annoys the hell out of me in Superman Returns with that frickin' kryptonite island. If Superman can still do all his Superman crap while kryptonite's around, then what the hell is even the point of having kryptonite in the world in the first place? Alright. Here we are at 11 with Maxwell Lord. In the comics, Maxwell Lord was once a successful businessman who helped to establish the global superhero group Justice League International. In his earlier appearance, he'd been portrayed as sometimes more self-serving and sometimes a bit more heroic, but much later it was revealed this was all part of a long-term ruse to infiltrate the superhuman community to gain as much information about them as possible, due to his own intense distrust of metahumans. Having gained the ability to control the minds of others, Lord rose in the ranks of the spy organization Checkmate and gained access to surveillance systems like no others, and learned the secrets and weaknesses of the metahuman community. Once he was uncovered, he used his mental control to force Superman to go on a rampage that put millions of lives in jeopardy. When Wonder Woman uses her lasso of truth to force him to answer how to end his domination over Superman's mind, Lord says that the only way he'll ever give it up is to kill him. Seeing no other choice, Wonder Woman does so. But, having anticipated this outcome, Maxwell had his satellites record and broadcast his murder to the entire world, causing an even greater distrust in metahumans among the population. In the DCEU, they go with the original shady businessman aspect of Lord, as well as him being created in the 80s, and just start making up the rest. This version's business is failing, so he begins searching for a fabled artifact called the Dreamstone that has the power to make any wish come true. In the comics, the Dreamstone is a powerful artifact wielded by both Dr. Destiny and Dream of the Endless that can manifest dreams into reality, so that's kinda similar, but not really. When he finds it, he wishes to become the embodiment of the stone itself, and gains the power to grant others wishes in exchange for what he wants most from them. Though, in doing so, his own life force is slowly drained, and he becomes more and more distant from his son. The Dreamstone is said to have caused many societies in the past to collapse, and chaos follows wherever Lord grants wishes. Having gained access to a global broadcasting network after granting the president's wish, he starts granting wishes to everyone on the planet, taking some of their life force in exchange to heal himself, causing chaos on a worldwide scale. Wonder Woman reaches him and uses her lasso of truth to show him a vision of how he's been neglecting his son, and makes a speech to the world to renounce their wishes for the good of all. People do wind up listening, and Max gives up his own power to be close with his son. So, in the comics, the two main things Maxwell Lord is known for is putting together a Justice League International and going crazy and trying to kill all metahumans. Not only does this version do neither, he's also based back in the 80s, so even if they wanted to use him in the modern day again, he'd be like in his 60s. Alright, now down to 10 we have Ratcatcher. In the comics, Ratcatcher was an exterminator in Gotham named Otis Flanagan, who developed a hatred for the citizens of Gotham and all of humanity, seeing them as the true vermin. Having learned how to train and communicate with rats, he used them to help him kidnap and torture his victims before coming into conflict with Batman. In the DCEU, Ratcatcher is dead when we're introduced to his daughter, who has taken on the mantle. His daughter's surname is not Flanagan, so his name is likely different, but we cannot be sure. He also does not operate in Gotham, but in Portugal instead. However, for all we know, he's been there at some point in the past, judging by the fact that Peacemaker's heard of him before. He does not seem as murderous and psychotic as the comic version, using his ability to control rats instead to steal valuables to fund his drug problems. Like the comic version, he does wear a gas mask, implying he may have been an exterminator at some point as well. Though he was very close with his daughter, he left her an orphan when he died of an overdose, leading to her picking up the mantle as Ratcatcher 2. In the comics, he does not have a daughter, and though he does eventually die, no one takes up his mantle. And there we go. That's about where characters having much of any similarity to the character they're supposed to be adapting ends. The ones above at least look or act a little bit like the source material. The rest of this is gonna get a bit messy. So at 9 we have Kordax. In the movies, Kordax was the ancient king of Nekris, the Lost Kingdom, one of the 7 unified kingdoms of Atlantis before its fall. He was the younger brother of Atlantis' own king Atlan. He created the Black Trident that turned himself and all citizens of Nekris into undead monsters, and was defeated and sealed away by his brother for thousands of years until he was awakened by Black Manta in the modern day. In the comics, every sentence I just said is completely wrong. Nekris is not the Lost Kingdom, but the Black City, an underwater city that materializes in different areas for short periods of time. It is not an ancient city ruled over by Kordax, but a modern one ruled over by the tyrant Mongo, who fought Atlantis due to their acceptance of surface dwellers before the city disappeared yet again. Kordax is a totally different character than any of this. He's an ancient Atlantean ancestor to Aquaman, who was born with green scales and blonde hair, and abandoned at birth because of his disfigurement. He later tried to invade Atlantis using his ability to control seed creatures, but failed. Though initially shown to have died, he later appeared in the modern day, facing against Aquaman. The only similarities are being ancient Atlanteans and enemies of Atlantis. Why they grabbed this name, I have to guess, is that they somehow found and liked the name Nekris, but they thought Mongo was too silly of a name, so they switched it to Kordax instead? Not that any of it mattered. I doubt the movie would have bombed any less whether they called him Mongo or any other name in the world. At 8, we have Bloodsport. Robert DuBois was drafted into the Vietnam War when he was younger, but deserted due to fear of dying. His younger brother joined in his stead, passing himself off as his brother, but lost both his arms and legs in battle. This caused Robert to go insane with guilt, spending years in psychiatric care. Robert was found and chosen for a plan by Lex Luthor to kill Superman. His now crazed fixation with Vietnam was used to manipulate him into believing he needed to murder Superman, and he was outfitted with a device that allowed him to teleport many advanced weapons to his hands, including a gun that shoots kryptonite needles. Contrary to Lex's plan, Bloodsport just starts going on a crazed killing spree to bring Superman out, and though he managed to injure Superman with kryptonite, he was eventually defeated. In the movies, he shares basically 2 similarities. Instead of being able to teleport weapons to him, he has an advanced gun that can transform into different types of guns. And he did shoot Superman with kryptonite. Otherwise, the characters share no similarities. In the DCEU, Bloodsport is basically the DCEU version of Deadshot redone, but just changed up a bit since they couldn't get the original actor and they didn't want to recast him. He's a military veteran turned assassin who uses advanced weapons to complete his kills. He was hired to kill Superman with a kryptonite bullet, but only managed to put him in the hospital, leading to his arrest. Like Deadshot, he has a daughter, which he does not have in the comics, but Bloodsport's relationship to his daughter is a lot more strained. And like Deadshot, he joins Task Force X for her sake. Unlike the comic version, who wears a red mask and military-style gear, the movie version wears an over-the-top badass skull outfit. Though the upper half of the helmet does kinda emulate the comic version's mask, I suppose, now that I'm looking closely at it, if I'm being generous. Clearly, they didn't really care about adapting a character as small as Bloodsport well, and rightly figured not that many people would even care, so found some other gun guy to replace Deadshot and called it a day. Down at 7, with another Task Force X member, Blackguard. Blackguard was a common criminal who was given an advanced armor by the criminal group known as the 1000 that allowed him to create an energy mace and shield. After failing the organization multiple times, they decided to have him killed, though he was able to escape. Much later, he was recruited into Task Force X, where he was killed. In the movies, he looks nothing similar, wearing a totally different outfit and having a completely different build. Whether his backstory is anything similar, or if his outfit does have the ability to make energy weapons, we don't know, as all he does is sell out the team and get killed. So, he does have dying in common, and we can't confirm whether or not he has the abilities he has in comics. So, At 6, we have Dr. Sivana. Now, as much as I'd like to say the movie version of Sivana shares literally nothing in common with his comics counterpart and is the straight-up worst adaptation of all time, I can't. The classic and awesome stock evil scientist version of Sivana and all of Captain Marvel lore was replaced in 2012 with a crappy rebooted version, with very little in common with these characters who've existed since the damn 40s. The DCEU version is adapted from this crappy reboot version of Sivana, but does still somehow manage to be a poor adaptation anyways. In the modern crappy comics, Thaddeus Sivana was a scientist who was searching for the secrets of magic to save his dying family. This leads to him learning about the wizard Shazam and the legends of Black Adam, who he awakens. When Sivana opens Adam's tomb, he is hit by a bolt of lightning that gives him the ability to see magic from one of his eyes. Due to this connection to magic, Sivana's bones and muscles begin to weaken in a crappy attempt to make him look like the classic, much better Sivana. He went on to continue trying to learn the secrets of magic and comes into opposition with the Shazam family. And luckily, every now and then, a writer forgets that he's even supposed to be this new crappy version and just writes him like the classic one. In the DCEU version, Sivana was a candidate to gain the Wizard Shazam's power when he was a young boy, but was rejected, causing him to spend the rest of his life searching for ways to find the wizard and gain those abilities he'd been denied. He finally gained access to the wizard in the Rock of Eternity and stole the Eye of Sin that embedded itself in his eye and gave him the power to control the 7 deadly sins of man. The sins grant him many powers similar to Billy Batson, including strength, speed, the ability to fly, and the ability to shoot lightning bolts. He uses this newfound power to try and steal Billy's power, but is defeated and loses those magical powers. This version is not shriveled. He does not wear glasses. They claim he's a scientist, but we don't really see much of that. And he uses magical powers he never gained in the comics to oppose the Shazam family. And we later see that he just remains trapped in his cell for years, while either the classic or even the modern versions of Sivana would have quickly devised a way to escape. This is not Sivana. This is just a crappy version of Black Adam, since they clearly wanted to use him as the villain, but were not able to due to The Rock's very weird ego issues about the character. And now here we are at the top 5 worst adapted DCEU villains, starting with KG Beast. Anatoly Nayazev is a highly trained assassin, master of multiple martial arts, and cybernetically enhanced agent of the top secret cell of the KGB known as the Hammer. He was sent to kill 10 high-ranking U.S. officials meeting in Gotham. Though Batman tried to stop him, KGB's killed all but 3 of his targets in only 10 days. He is a brutal, competent, and committed assassin, having poisoned over 80 people at a banquet just to kill 1 of his targets, and willing to cut off his own hand to avoid escape, and then replace it with an advanced and deadly gun. He was eventually stopped, but has returned many times with new missions to kill many people, both for the KGB and as a private mercenary. He wears an awesome costume, and despite his somewhat silly name, he is a very dangerous badass. In the DCEU, Anatoly Kryazev is just a normal-looking guy who works for Lex Luthor. He is a Russian mercenary with a team involved in framing Superman for the massacre of a warlord's forces overseas. He does various odd jobs for Lex across the movie, some of which involve killing people. Towards the end, he takes Martha Kent hostage and was ordered to burn her to death with a flamethrower if Lex didn't contact him in order otherwise. When Batman found him and he threatens Martha with the flamethrower, Batman very quickly kills him and saves Martha. He does not wear any kind of costume. He seems fairly competent as a mercenary, but is nowhere near as deadly and dangerous as his comic counterpart. And instead of having any association with the KGB, he's just a random guy who happens to be Russian and is working for Lex. And unlike the comic version, who relished the opportunity to prove himself against Batman, this version is a coward who hides behind an old lady to not have to face the Bat. Now down to 4, we have Weasel. Weasel in the comics is not a weasel creature like in the movies. He's a college professor named John Monroe, who psychotically dresses like a weasel and murders people. Though much later he is portrayed more animalistically, it's still nothing like the creature seen in the movies. Now, as I said in my earlier Creature Commandos ranking video, nothing says that this isn't his backstory and he wasn't turned into a weasel creature somehow, but I severely doubt it. Now entering the top 3 worst adapted DCEU villains with Dr. Alchemy. In the comics, Dr. Alchemy is the alter ego of Albert Desmond, a chemist who suffers from dissociative identity disorder. His evil alter ego uses his knowledge of chemistry to at first become Mr. Element, but later learns of the Philosopher's Stone and uses its powers to transform any element into any other element to become Dr. Alchemy. He's an enemy of the Flash and an old colleague of Barry Allen. In the DCEU, he's just a regular co-worker of Barry's at the Central City Police Department. In the alternate Flashpoint timeline Barry creates, he's Barry's dopey deadbeat roommate, acting totally different than the more professional main timeline version. Now, normally I'd be a bit more forgiving on a character like this because it could be, though is unlikely, that they placed him here with plans to turn him into a villain later on, but in this case, we know this will never happen since the DCEU has been euthanized, and where the characters are left is where they're likely going to stay. So this version is just a regular guy who may or may not secretly moonlight as a supervillain, but likely doesn't. And now, down to number 2 with Carapax. Conrad Carapax was an archaeologist trying to learn about what the original Blue Beetle Dan Garrett was researching when he died. He uncovered the lab of the second Blue Beetle's evil uncle, as well as one of the robots he'd planned to use to take over the world. When Carapax tried to activate it, something malfunctioned and he was electrocuted to death. But somehow his mind was transferred into the robot's incredibly powerful body, and he became the criminal known as Carapax, the Indestructible Man, clashing with the second Blue Beetle and other superheroes multiple times. In the Blue Beetle film, he's renamed to Ignacio Carapax for some reason. He was orphaned in Guatemala and trained by a military group before stepping on a landmine. He was recovered by Victoria Cord and his damaged limbs were replaced with cybernetic ones. He served her for years before agreeing to have a device implanted into his neck that would allow an armor to materialize around him when needed. Those armor actually does look surprisingly close to the comics. It's something he wears instead of being his actual body. And if they just left it at that, he'd be a pretty bad adaptation, but nowhere near this low. He'd be up between Alberto Falcone and Doomsday, probably. The thing that puts him this low on the ranking is that for some reason, they decided to call him the name of a totally different and completely unrelated character, OMAC. There are multiple OMACs in DC continuity. The original is a hero from the future who was originally known as Buddy Blank before the Global Peace Agency chose him to be connected to the Brother Eye satellite and empowered into their champion, OMAC, or the One-Man Army Corps. The other most well-known version of OMAC is the Omni-Mind and Community, an army transformed from regular humans into cyborgs due to nanotechnology secretly injected into the population, controlled by the rogue Brother Eye satellite with the purpose of wiping out all metahumans on the Earth. This OMAC is neither of those. I don't know why they even decided to use this name for the device implanted into him that gives him this suit. The only connection OMAC even really has to Blue Beetle is Maxwell Lord killed the second Blue Beetle, Ted Cord, when he found out about the OMAC project. This version, we get no Brother Eye, no Mohawk, no nothing. Just a poorly done version of Carapax with the name OMAC thrown onto him. So there we go. And finally, here we are at the number 1 worst adapted DCEU villain, and I guarantee that for the majority of you, whoever you're expecting to see pop up here, this isn't going to be them. And number 1, we have Karshan. Who the hell is Karshan? In both the comics and the DCEU? That's a great question, and I'd love to know where the people making this movie even grabbed that name from. In the comics, Karshan was an identity used by the Green Lantern villain, the Shark. The Shark is a totally different humanoid shark villain than King Shark, by the way. The Shark was just a regular shark who was caught in a radioactive explosion, causing it to undergo millions of years of evolution instantaneously. He developed intelligence, a humanoid form, and advanced psychic abilities, but retained his shark-like hunter-slash-prey instincts. And in his search for prey, he wound up fighting against the Green Lantern. Later on, though, he used his mental abilities to create a false Atlantean form known as Karshan. He forced the Atlantean Council to depose Aquaman from the throne and install him in his Karshan form as the new king of Atlantis. Aquaman returns and soon exposes Shark's true form and his plans to take over Atlantis and the seas. In the DCEU, I have no idea how they got this name or why the hell they used it in this way, but Karshan is this lady. She's a member of one of the great Atlantean noble houses and serves on Atlantis' Council of Houses, who oversees Arthur Curry's role as king. Why do this? I don't really know, but in an interview with the director, someone asked him about this, and it didn't really seem like he even knew this name was attached to a shark character. This is exactly what I hate most with grabbing random names and tossing them onto random characters for adaptations. What purpose does it serve? No one who doesn't read comics will know it's even from a comic character. Even most people who read comics won't realize. The only people who could possibly even notice are die-hard fans, and all you're gonna do is annoy the hell out of them. There's just no tangible benefit to tossing random names on random characters, and it's a bad habit I wish the people making these movies and shows would just stop. Because regardless of your intention, when you name a character after a comic name, it is an adaptation of that character. Now, I could easily fix this by starting a fan theory that this Karshan is a false identity created by the as-of-yet unseen DCEU shark to infiltrate Atlantean society in order to usurp Arthur, but what's the point? The people writing this didn't put that much thought into it. Why in the hell should I? Well, there we go. That's honestly a bit of an anticlimactic ending, but so is the ending of the actual DCEU overall, so I think it fits quite well. How many of these villains do you even remember? How many did you even notice were supposed to be a character the first time watching? And most importantly, which ones did you like and think actually either benefited from the changes or didn't really matter whether they were changed or not? Since I've now done the worst adapted DCEU heroes and villains, next up we're going to have to do the best adapted DCEU heroes and villains, which is going to be very interesting, as the contrast isn't actually going to be that different from the worst adapted, honestly. Anyways, time to go smash my brain against a wall to prepare for that best adapted list. If you know what universe you want to see a list like this for next, let me know below, and while you're down there, click that subscribe and bell button so you do not miss 1 second of a guy on the internet complaining about comic book sharks ever again. Until then, see ya!